my speech? No. Okay, so the motion is this house regrets the prevailing narrative in children's media that good triumphs over evil. Like we're gonna define this house as like you're an average citizen person in the world, you just have a take on this. It's pretty strong. And like you have a lot of good reasons and you've thought this through very well. Like the first thing I'm gonna do for you is I'm just gonna tell you what this like looks like in the real world. I'm gonna tell you like what we actually prefer. I'm gonna go into some like framing on like what the effect of media and like these kinds of stories have on children. And then I'm gonna get into my arguments about how like this is just not true, how like it sets up really bad expectations. Okay. So like first of all, I think like what does this look like? I think it looks like Star Wars, where you have like Luke Skywalker is able to beat Darth Vader and he's able to kill Emperor Palpatine. Like he struggles, but he ends up getting it in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Aang does all these trials and tribulations, but like in the end, he struggles and he succeeds because he worked really hard and he found the right mentors. Or like, I don't know, like there's a bunch of even younger kids show like Wonder Pets, where every episode you have like pets singing and they always overcome the trouble. And if there's a bad person, they end up winning. The idea is essentially like a hero struggling, like they work really hard. They do like hard and very resolute. They know what they want at the get-go. They understand that evil exists and they can very easily pinpoint that evil and they're able to overcome it. Like the kind of world that we prefer is a story where like you either have like no good or evil. It really lives in the gray zone where you just have people who are like people and who like live hard lives and no one's necessarily a bad person. People are at odds with each other and like people win in these situations and lose, but you're not really sure if they should have won or should have lost. Or like stories with very clear heroes and villains, but like the heroes like often lose or like lose like in multiple situations, or even in situations where they win, like they end off like way worse than they would have when they started. Like winning was like not necessarily a good thing, and a lot of hard things came because of it. I think that's what I want to look at. Like I don't want or like losers that are self-righteous, like that works too. Like if you end up losing and you still feel happy about the journey, like that's still losing, and like that's still being different than the current narrative. Okay. Like now I want to just talk to you about like what I think the effect of this media is on children. I think like when from a young age, you're watching all of these stories, you're watching these TV shows, like you think you develop a lot of role models, you develop a lot of values that you think are specifically good. Like I think like you also develop a big part of your personal narrative from these stories that I think is very important to you. Like I think like when you see these people, you see the things that they succeed, you see the kind of values they have, you see the kind of friends they have, and like you normally associate with some of these characters. You pick out your favorite ones from the stories. Normally it's from the hero side, and like you just see yourself in these people, and you would really like if you would have a similar life to them. Like I think like most people growing up and they're watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, they're watching Aang and his squad walk around. Like that's a fun place to be. Like these are cool people to be around. Like this seems like they're in like a real existential battle. They're fighting for something really important, and they end up winning. That's a really like rewarding story for someone who's young. I think that's like really good for you. Like I think it gives you direction as a kid. Like you're able to like put yourself in a specific situation and like want to be this kind of person. I think like that's kind of like the role these stories play in your lives. Like I think like you try to like recreate these kinds of situations your regular life as a kid, so you can like again be the hero on the playground when you do like your fun things, or like let's say when you're working hard to get into a certain school, or you're working hard to like do well on your grade 4 math competition, like you're thinking about Aang from Avatar: The Last Airbender or Naruto from Naruto, but just like these people are in your head and you're thinking about their struggles and the things that they did in order to succeed, and like you find a lot of value in that. Okay, now like why do I think it's really bad when the narratives that you have in front of you are specifically situations where you always have good over evil? I think just first of all, I think that the idea that good is going to triumph over evil is just not true. Like I think like in like the real world, like villains will win all the time, like on large scale, like the Nazis existed, like they won in Germany, or like Chinese authoritarianism is not a good thing, and like it's happening, and like these people are there's a lot of like movements in China for like good kind of governments where they care about minorities and they don't do the things that they do, but like these people lose constantly all the time. Like you have even just like really local examples, like if you're at school, like you can have a bully that never like a bully who never ends up getting caught, or whenever you try to call him out, like you're the one who gets in trouble, or you have a teacher that's mean to you and you never get like the kind of resolve that you want out of that situation. They end up winning. They still have the same kind of social prestige. They still have the same kind of like social support that's indicative of winning. So like, what does this narrative do in these situations? I think like it convinces people that like winners are good guys, and I think it goes both ways. I think like if you're someone who does bad things and you win, you associate that win with something about yourself, and that being a good characteristic that you hold. Also, people that lose, like they see the winners as a good guy. Like I think they're like if you're a kid and you're in a situation where you lost, like I think you're obviously gonna feel like upset. You're gonna cry. You're gonna be like this is gonna be, and either it's gonna push you to like just be really strong and try to fight for it again, which like is oftentimes not a really good decision. Or like a lot of times you're gonna look at these people as winners and you're gonna put yourself in their shoes and be like, this is the people I want to be. Also, like it makes people who are lose like feel like they are not the hero, like they don't have the capacity to win. Like you can't occupy the position of your favorite hero because you don't have the chops to win. Like in your situations you found yourself in your lives, like you have never been able to rise to the top and be the kind of person that you want. I think that like when you think about like in the real world, only a small amount of people like end up actually living the hero lifestyle. So when you look at the people in these stories, like most people in their lives do not get to win every situation they're in. Actually, most people in their lives lose all the time. Like our society filters people on like multiple levels. Like most people end up being lower level employees working for like big bosses or like people who are going to be assholes in their lives. Like I think like some people might be able to get personal satisfaction of reaching the goals that were set as they were a kid, but I think most people are going to have to like find contentment in a different way, not through winning and not through being the best person. Like I think like what the impact is most people are just going to have a worse life. Because if you're just setting yourself up to succeed in all these situations where it's like necessarily impossible, even though you're right and even though you think you're the good person, like I think in a lot of those situations you're going to end up failing. I think that's going to be really damaging to your self-esteem. I think when you think that like the harder you work and the better the person you are, the more success you have in life, and when life doesn't reflect those things, you start to have a lot of self-doubt. You start thinking that like maybe I'm not the good person. Maybe it's me that's failing. When like oftentimes like it's just like your surrounding circumstances. Also, what I think is like an even worse of an impact. I think like everyone thinks they're a hero. I think when stories are uncomparative about like what good is and what evil is, and always shows like the hero having a clear idea of what is good and always ending up triumphing over evil, it means people like in similar situations in their lives think that they are the hero and want to push forward for that narrative. So like I think like when you think about like people on the far right, how like they see themselves as like white saviors, or people who like are a part of like really bad organizations and have really bad ideas, they see themselves as heroes because they grow up thinking that like the ideas that are in their head can't be bad because they hold them near and dear and they're willing to push these things forward. I don't think anyone thinks of themselves as a villain. I think like when stories tell you like you're a hero and you're gonna triumph over evil, and they don't tell you that you need to reevaluate your ideas and you might be on the evil side, or that you're gonna live in this gray zone. Like I think that's like really difficult. So like I think like what our case is really about is that like when you tell people that heroes always win over evil, you make them think that like being good and being evil is very intuitive, and you also make them think that if they don't end up winning, that they weren't good to begin with, which I think are both very harmful reasons. And I gave you some like important impacts. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank that speaker for their remarks, and I'd now like to invite the leader of the opposition to come up and present the opening for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, 1 second, sorry. I think Gov is rather unrealistic in their like characterization about the purpose of these shows and how they're going to like impact people in a way that's going to turn people to be one-sided, etc. I'm going to characterize like how these kids shows are actually likely to like manifest itself in terms of like impacting people and like impacting people's actions, as well as like defining like what are the main purpose of these shows. I'm going to firstly talk about like why it's good that we have media that has good win, and then we're going to talk about viewership and reach and how on both fronts op is better. First, I want to challenge this idea about like why it's good to have media where good wins. I'm going to start with characterizing like the kind of media in which opposition supports, because I think that a lot of the shows that like Gov correctly points out, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where like it has a clear happy or good ending, are still able to be very complex and educational in a way that is able to clearly demonstrate like the kind of behaviors that is considered like uncontroversially good in society, but also not things like going to teach you like racism and why supremacy is good, like Gov points out. But secondly, I think they're likely to have still like really complex character development and background, and really complex storylines that actually make them compelling narratives to the audiences in the first place. So for example, like Zuko in Avatar has this huge redemption arc where he basically went from a fascist to someone who is determined to see good in everyone, right? So I think that's the kind of narrative in which we're still able to push, and I think that's really, really good. gonna explain why it's really good for kids then to internalize this kind of narrative. First, I think the happy endings that
You know
kids
why?
like that these kids shows and things defends are often like very easy to process in the sense that like usually the endings are very uncontroversially like good in the sense that like you can easily interpret like Aang beating the Fire Lord, but still choosing to like forgive the Fire Lord as a sign of like strength and like winning the war basically. But B, I think people, and particularly children who watch these media, just care a lot about the character in which they see. So they're likely to, when they see the kind of good behavior that is enacted, want to imitate them and want to become them. And I think a lot of the arguments that Gov points out about how kids like want to be a hero are likely going to fall on opposition side, because at the point at which we have these narratives, that's easier for them to want to imitate and easier for them to actually imitate good behavior. Thirdly, I think you're able to clearly see the negative impact in which harming people has in a way that's like different than how you would feel in a day-to-day life basis. But lastly, I think like when struggles in like show parallel when in a show like parallels issues in reality, you're able to apply a lot of the same compassion you have for characters, and you have a lot like compassion for like people who have suffered in the show to people in real life, and be able to internalize and understand like the kind of narratives in which the show is able to point out. And note that like I think both sides of the house agree that like the media we consume are really important to influencing the way we view the world and interpret things. So I think this is likely to result in a lot of like good actions from kids. I think in terms of like the impact in which we're able to get from this, I think you're able to get a lot of like just a lot more net like hope and motivation from kids after they're able to see this show. So for example, like seeing a lot of like narratives that portray like good being ultimately able to win over like any kind of trouble in which happens in the world or problems in the kids' lives. You can help kids in bad situations, for example, like it being bullied or having traumatic family experiences, feel the hope that kind of eventually things will be better. And I think that's really, really important to just the mental health of kids. And note, I want to weigh this impact and talk about like the main goal of kids shows is often to like provide entertainment and to teach some kind of like good value in this sense. And I think at the point at which like we're mostly able to achieve that and we're able to like help significantly kids and make them feel more uplifted after like these shows, I think that's a significant plus for opposition. But the second impact I think is you're able to inspire people to do good, things on a day-to-day basis. So I think like when at the point at which you're able to internalize that kindness and doing good is able to bring some kind of tangible positive impact. And note that on the government side, at the point at which you have like quote unquote realistic images or like cases where evil wins, people are more likely to internalize that like doing good is ultimately not going to have any kind of positive impact. And I think that makes kids more likely to internalize and to like give up or try less hard in terms of helping others. I think the point at which you internalize like doing good has tangible positive impacts, you're able to incentivize them to be able to do just small acts of kindness, even sharing like crayons in class or being more inclusive towards like new people at school or any kind of really, really basic day-to-day actions or just helping other people out, right? I think all of those actions are more likely to happen at the point at which they feel like doing good has a good outcome. And this can even incentivize people like bullies or just people like not super great kids to become better at the point at which they get the message from these shows that like improving your behavior can ultimately result in like some kind of better action. For example, when like again, I'm just gonna keep quoting Avatar, but when Zuko like is able to like ultimately learn his lesson and become better, I think that's the point at which like even bullies or kids that have gone through hardships can see that their tangible actions is able to result in them like having a better outcome. But I think I also want to flag that even things, even like these lessons that you learn in your childhood is likely to stay with you as an adult, right? So I think your love for like childhood shows and like the kind of narratives and kind of morals you learn from your like from your childhood is likely able to carry into
Last
like
chance.
adult life. For example, no thanks, like how big fandoms are for like kids shows and adult populations, the amount of people that like learn languages and change their behavior because of what they learn to in shows. So I think that when you're able to like get this kind of narrative, you're more likely to like take the action towards something that you believe in and something that you think is good, but B, just be more likely to like have all of those actions carry out on a more long-term basis. I'm going to push the second argument about viewership and reach now, because note, like we're talking about like who is actually able to access these shows. I think we're mostly talking about the kind of media which is like content that kids are like really young and like can't really access on their own, and often like I don't know like needs their parents or whatever. I think like it's far more likely that parents want to give the kind of simple media that is able to like teach good values to their kids at that point, because they feel like the media will be like not harmful to them or teach them bad stuff. I think at that point on government, they're less likely that the kids consume. So I think like when like Gov is able to say like we want shows like that has evil win, I think you're likely to have like no impact in terms of like how many kids are actually able to access these kind of shows in the first place, or just far more likely to have less viewership overall. And I think this is really bad because you ultimately have kids not being actually able to learn and exposed to stories that could otherwise be really entertaining or really like educational, etc. And I think you also influence the like increase the influence of like, I don't know, the parents or other factors around these kids. For those reasons, we oppose.
Okay, I'd like to thank that speaker for their remarks and would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to present their case. Hear, hear.
Awesome. Okay, so if you hear anything in the background, it's my roommate. Sorry. Please POIs out loud because even though I have the chat open, I probably won't read it. Okay.
Oh, just before we go forward, I'm just going to be putting like the beginning of POI time, the end of POI time, and then I'll do this for Grace visually. Okay, just sorry, I just wanted to make that clear. Whenever you're ready.
Awesome. I think it's important to consider what kids get out of these stories, right? And it's something that we've talked about on Gov, and opposition tells you like that on one hand, you're going to get this really complex Avatar storyline that honestly, I don't entirely even understand because I haven't watched Avatar, at least in a very long time. But then also that you're going to get like, you know, this like big kind of overarching story. I don't think that those two things, like either, you know, a child is like, kids don't understand all of these things. I've run this motion with 10-year-olds. They don't understand Avatar or any like complicated like redemption arcs, things like that, right? I think they understand, you know, the ending of a story and they understand who, like, they understand what you do in that, right? And I think that when you have this narrative of, you know, good is always going to win, pushes a bunch of things we've already talked about, going to get into that, starting with reputation. Okay, so opposition comes up to you and tells you that like happy endings, they're easy to process. Like you're going to care about this character, you're going to imitate them, basically throughout life, right? And I think there's a couple things here. First of all, sure, maybe kids will imitate this, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing, right? If you have a bully that's, you know, fighting for power and imitating, you know, this hero that they saw where this hero, you know, like hurts people in order to, you know, win in the end, I don't think that kids necessarily can grasp the concept of it's fine, like of why they did that, right? I think they're more likely to say, oh, like this person maybe did some questionable things in order to win, right? Even if, you know, we can understand why that might be necessary if you're fighting back against, you know, a tyrannical government or something like that. I'm not necessarily convinced that children can do that, right? I think I'd rather this narrative that Zach pushes of, you know, if there's a gray zone, there's collaboration, right? Or when somebody doesn't necessarily win, that's okay. And you're allowed to lose and you're allowed to learn from that without it one day leading to a win, right? Just because you lose, let's say, it doesn't mean that you're going to win at that specific thing. Doesn't mean you're not going to win at anything, but doesn't mean you're going to win at that specific thing. And that's something I think that we lack. You necessarily lack when you have the narrative of good always triumphing over evil, right? If I really want a marker from another kid on a playground and I don't get it today, well, you know what? In my Disney movie that I watched, the hero wins. So I'm going to try again tomorrow and I'm going to keep trying until I get it because I'm the good guy and I'm the main character. I'm going to win. I don't think that that's a good narrative for kids. Because honestly, that's what they're going to get out of it. They're watching the same movie 100 times. Okay. They talk to you and then like, also, if you're going to imitate something, I think that it's really important as to what we are imitating, right? I think that big, yeah, before that, sure, I'll take the POI.
Okay, so you mentioned how like it's hard for kids and children to understand complicated storylines, and if they only have like they can only understand like a ending and that's it. I don't understand how it's easier for them to like think about the reasons why a bully might be bullying them or like to have that capacity to collaborate.
Yeah, I think that when a kid is shown something, they're going to, you know, they're going to learn maybe one or two things from this, right? So if somebody wins at the end, that's what they're going to learn. But if instead of somebody winning at the end, maybe, they watch the same couple movies, sometimes somebody wins, sometimes there's collaboration. And I think that then they're able to get a couple things, like more things out of it, rather than I've watched like maybe the same number of movies, like the same 5 movies all these times, but every time the good guy always wins no matter what. I think that then they're only learning one thing from that, which is like the good guy, the good person always wins, rather than like the narrative of, maybe nobody wins here, but that's okay because we work together. I think that you're only able to get that when somebody doesn't win at the end, because, because that's just how kids are able to remember things. If there's no like big flashy win at the end, then I think that that's when you're able to get those things. I don't think you're able to get those things because kids will look by them. Because winning sometimes can be a bigger reward, but I don't necessarily think that's what we want to push in this narrative. Okay. They talk to, I'm going to get back to the exploitation thing in a second because I have a response to like the viewership and reach point. But first of all, like continuing with refutation, opposition tells you that like this is going to be really motivating, and it's like, good, you're going to feel hope, right? I think that sure, maybe sometimes you could feel a little bit of hope, like they'll win eventually, but I think it's really important to consider what kids know, right? A week is like a year if you're a little kid. Like they don't understand necessarily time. And I think that when you are like talking about winning, if you are a child who's experiencing poverty or you're a child who's experiencing trauma, like opposition talks to you about, a big win can be really rare for you. And if that's all you see in media and that's all you see, but it's not happening to you, either, as Zach tells you, you could think that you yourself are the villain, right? And if I'm the villain, then why is like, I guess I'm never going to win, right? Or you could say that, like, I think that it's easy to see yourself as a villain, or easy for other people to instead see you as that, right? Just kind of like fulfilling the narrative of like, if you are the good guy, you will win. And I think that if a kid doesn't ever see themselves winning because they don't have a very long frame of reference, I think it's difficult for them to keep their hopes up. I think it's a lot easier when we present a more like accurate conception of the world, not necessarily telling them that like everybody is horrible, but telling them that, there's other things other than winning and losing. There's working together. There's, losing, but learning something from it. I think that that's something you can't get when you are focusing on a hero and like a hero's journey type of story, because that's, what gets views. Moving on to the viewership thing. Okay, 2 things on that. First of all, yeah, of course, like under the status quo, that's what gets views, but we were like, I think that like the whole thing of like regretting this concession is wishing that, we were in a world where we were able to have this collaboration, because then that would be what is getting views, because that's what would be normalized. I think that we're likely to, if you're like likely to win, you're more likely to fall into kind of a, whoever has the power, right? So that's maybe a white Western kind of conception of this power, conception of this winning, where first of all, lack of diversity, but second of all, just like that winning equals I get something big out of it, equals like, for kids, that would be like buying a Christmas present or anything like that. Like, I don't think that everyone is able to afford that. And I think that that really sets in kids from a young age that if I have something, if I am able to get a thing, or if I'm able to win, get whatever I want, that is because I am the main character. That is because I am, this person and I deserve it. And then if I don't, I guess I'm the villain, or I don't. I think it's easier to like exploit kids from a young age. Really important that, we let kids be kids and we let them learn without forcing this onto them. Proud to stand on government.
Okay, I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister and would now like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition up. Hear, hear.
Okay, I would like POIs in the chat, like type them. I really, interrupting distracts me, so please do not give me verbal POIs. I will not take you if you do. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin. Okay, panel, several things I'm going to do for you in this speech. I'm going to give you some framing on this round and what you should be weighing your adjudication on. I'm going to start with rebuilding the points that Hannah brought to you. There's going to be integrated refutation on the stuff that was brought from opposition. Sorry if it gets a little messy, but first the framing, right? So I think that objectively, the purpose of this media is to like entertain and educate children, right? Like that's why parents let their kids watch these shows. I think if Hannah and I can prove to you that either the ability to entertain children is inhibited or the ability to teach kids values is inhibited, we should probably win this debate on that basis alone. On to then the rebuilding and the reputation. So first, I'm going to talk about reach and viewership. Then I'm going to talk about how kids internalize these stories in the short term in their childhood and then in the long term. Okay, reach and viewership. Why? Starting off with whether or not parents let their kids watch these shows, because I think government's response to this, and I'm going to start with it because it's what they ended their speech on, was really lacking. Because all they said was this is a regrets motion, so we just have to prove that in another world it would have been better. No, government's burden is to prove why it is likely in a world in which it is normalized that there are stories with the gray areas they talk about, gray areas that they never actually define or elucidate in a way that I think is very poor case building. Are actually likely to become prevalent. What Hannah and I are actually likely to be widely consumed. What Hannah and I tell you is that no, they will not be, right? For a very simple reason. Parents don't want their kids to like be upset. If they think their kids are going to watch stories that will distress them, they'll just tell them to turn off the TV because they don't want to deal with a crying kid at 2 a.m. who had a nightmare because the TV show they watched confused them. They will just restrict their children's access to this media. I think that this is harmful, and I think the gray area is likely to be really harmful and potentially distressing for kids because they'll see bad people who don't get punished, which would probably be upsetting for kids who are trying to learn about how to be good, right? Also because they'll see people who hurt people just get away with that. And that's probably upsetting for somebody who's not used to being exposed to those things in the real world. No POIs at this time. So presumably they don't let them watch. This is really bad for several reasons, right? I think it's bad because it means either kids aren't entertained and that's bad. But I think secondarily, for kids who maybe grow up with more like conservative parents or in areas where you're not encouraged to be as compassionate to people who are different from you, you don't get to learn those lessons from TV shows because you're never exposed to them. And that's probably really harmful because it means you're not getting exposed to those values at a younger age when it's easier to internalize them. And it means you're just being influenced by like your conservative parents. And that's probably what you're going to grow up to believe because that belief is never countered. No POIs at this time. On to then, I think that's really bad because that's like affecting you as a kid and affect you in your adult life. On to then how this affects kids. How do kids view themselves as good or bad in relation to the media they consume? And then on to you and your adult life. Okay, on to children, right? So what opposition tells you is that kids are going to see these like good people always winning and that they're going to think that they are the villain if they don't end up winning. I think that this is false for several reasons, right? Because A, note that when kids see these stories, they don't just see the good people winning. They see the associated behaviors of both the people who win and the people who lose, which means they associate the fact people win with doing the good things that that good character did. And I think opposition tries to say, well, heroes are violent sometimes, and that's bad. But I think that even in like the context of watching like Star Wars or Avatar, you see the different kinds of violence that like the good and the bad people use, right? Like for example, in Avatar, Aang is far more restricted in the violence that he uses than like the villains he is fighting. So I think that already kids can see like different attempts at using like maybe more harmful things. But I think and that's in our like worst case, but I think more realistically probably kids see heroes who basically just do good and probably don't have a net harm to people get rewarded for the fact that they did good, and they see bad people who do bad things being the ones that lose. So I think if you're a kid who's doing regularly good things and still not winning, you probably don't think you're a villain even if you still don't get what you want, right? Because you don't see in yourself the associated behaviors of villainous that you see with the bad characters in the shows that you watch. So I just think it's really kind of like unnuanced and overly simplistic for them to say, oh, well, if you don't win, you'll think you're a villain. I think I've explained why that's the case. Beyond that, then, I think there's unique benefits to even if you're good and you don't win, why these shows are beneficial to you, right? Because I think that when you watch those shows and you see people who act like you or who you are inspired to act like win and get good things happening to them or are able to defeat people who are bad to them, it inspires you to keep trying to be good, right? Because you see these people that you like, that you feel compassion towards, that you see as heroes. And doing good things, and it makes you, I'll take a POI at 5:30, everyone can chill, and it makes you, and it like inspires you to do those good things, and I think you kind of lose, and I think it prevents you from being defeatist because it gives you hope that one day maybe you can win just like they do if you continue trying to be good. And I think the fact that it inspires you to do this both in the short term, but I think also probably carries on into your adult life, means that you will do more net good overall than if you were likely to watch the kinds of TV shows that government is talking to you about, where probably good people never win. So what is your motivation to be good if you think you'll never actually succeed with it? Now I will take a POI from back half.
Okay, so I don't think it's reasonable that the alternative is like always just like nuance. For example, you could have shows like Doc McStuffins where you're like repairing broken toys and there's no like evil character, but characters can still have challenges that they face without like needing to like portray certain people as uniquely evil, for instance.
Okay. So several responses to that idea. So I think one, the heroes that we're talking about also face challenges. So I think if your goal is to teach kids methods of like perseverance, that's still happening in these TV shows. But I do think given the prevalence of like bad things that happen in day-to-day life, it's good to teach kids that even in those kinds of circumstances, uniquely, they can still persevere to try to be better, right? I think you never get that lesson if you're not ever giving people opponents like they actually face in their real world. I think beyond that then, to talk then about people's like adult life, where I think this is also like really important. I think when kids watch these TV shows, they see struggles that can parallel the things that happen in real life, right? Like you see people being mean to each other and like the hero says, no, stop that. And then like they get like a lollipop or whatever. I think that that's like what happens as a kid, right? But I think then when you're an adult and you have other like kinds of TV shows, you like also continue to advocate for good in cases where it parallels like instances that happens in the shows that you like, right? So for example, like adults who watch Avatar, maybe you're like more likely to like maybe like because you watch kids when you were a kid, you watch people who did good things, you try to make those good things even into your adult life. Maybe it makes you more likely to volunteer. Maybe it really taught you the importance of voting. Maybe it really taught you the importance of like advocating against certain government policies because you hold up those show figures as a role model even into your adult life, so you continue to try to like act in ways that would be in accordance with their values, which motivates you to do good things for a really long time and to advocate against people who are doing bad things for a long time, and you're not disheartened because you believe that eventually the good will win out. And I think that that hope is why OO wins.